We are recording, so don't say anything you'll later regret.
Hi, Ann.
I'm your mother.
Let's see.
I feel like I can start. I feel like everyone knows Greg, so I feel I can just introduce him and let him start chatting about his work. And then if anybody wants to ask any questions, go ahead. Or if you want to say anything in the chat, go ahead as well. I'll kind of keep an eye on the chat if you want to say anything. But I'll hand it over to Greg and he'll chat about his work.
Okay, I think you need to give me permission to share my screen.
Okay, sorry, I thought I gave you.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the button, so.
It's
oh yeah, I see it. I see it. Okay, it's there. And hopefully. Oops. Okay, can everybody see that?
I do.
All right, great. So first of all, thank you all for attending. As these complete strangers who are on this artist talk, have no idea who I am. My name is Greg Mason Burns. I am a visual artist, mostly a painter, but I also dabble in other things, and I'll kind of go through that a little bit during this presentation. First thing is I would like to thank Watershed Studios and Grace for hosting me here in Galway, Ireland, where today was actually a nice bright blue sky day, which has been the the only one for the past week, and it's supposed to end abruptly tomorrow again with more rain, but I've actually been really productive, so that is great. I also would like to thank the Maine Arts Commission for funding this residency of mine. I could not have done it without them. Maine Arts Commission is an independent state agency supported by the National Endowment for the Arts. Okay. First of all, just a little bit about me. I am from Maine, northeast corner of New England. That's where I currently work and live. That's where my studio is, but it's not where I developed as an artist. Before I developed as an artist, I worked and lived in Boston, Massachusetts for a hospital in finance. And I really did not like my job. So I needed a change in my life. So I quit my job to become an artist, and I moved to South America. First, I moved to Chile, in Santiago de Chile, and I didn't speak any Spanish when I arrived. I spoke a little bit, enough to survive, but definitely not enough to hold a normal conversation. That obviously had its share of emotional upheavals, I guess you could say. It added stress sometimes to my life, added confusion, but more often than not, it added hours to simple tasks that would normally take me 5 or 10 minutes. While I was in Chile, I met my wife, and 8 months later, I picked up and I moved to Brazil, in the south of Brazil, to Curitiba. And when I was there, when I arrived, I didn't speak any Portuguese either. So that was another sort of emotional upheaval. Brazil and Chile are very different countries. And Brazil presented a little bit of a culture shock. It's in Brazil where I spent about 5 years. And that's where I really developed my voice. And that's where I really ended up working with emotional unknowns. So chaos, stress, even adventure, these sorts of feelings that leave us in a state of not knowing what's going to happen next. And that sort of represents the driving force behind my art. Right now, I am in that little harbor, actually about where the L and the Y are, in Ireland. So that's where I'm currently doing my residency. This is my third residency. The first one was in Lisboa, Portugal, and the second one was in Acton, Massachusetts, which is just outside of Boston. So emotional unknowns. I mean, this is sort of it's sort of murky waters, right? Because we don't know what an emotional unknown is. I mean, this is something that makes us feel like we don't really know what's going to happen, but we feel it, like it's inside of us, not physically, but we actually feel it. So when I try to work with emotional unknowns, I'm working with something I'm trying to create something that's going to make you feel that way. You're not really sure what you're feeling or what you're seeing, but there's something there. Mostly I have painted with oil in the past, such as this painting with Fields with Sky. It's a takeoff from a photo, which I developed in an abstract way. So it's a sort of abstract landscape. The painting in the middle is the massacre. And sometimes what I try to do is I actually try to take away the noise, because a lot of times when we have this uncertainty around us, taking away and stripping away all the noise and the distraction is a way to see things clearer. And then sometimes, like you see on this watercolor on paper, the red stripe here, it's chaos. You know, I'm throwing stuff on. I'm using the technique in a way that is unusual. It's straight from the tube, not watering it down at all. And I'm just throwing it onto the paper. So I'm trying to do all these things, trying to attack this problem from different angles, to get myself to feel what I'm creating, but also trying to get other people to feel something as well. And I do title things sometimes with the intention of getting people to really stop and think, you know, what is it they're looking at, and you know, whether or not they like it based on the aesthetics of it, and then also taking into consideration the name of it as well. I moved on a little bit more to some other things, not just oil. I have a whole series called Walking on Both Sides, where I'm working with different types of paint, newspaper, adhesive, different types of materials such as wood. This was sort of my first foray into collage. My first foray into abstract photography, although I did not know what I was getting into when I did this, was this photo of a shadow that was in my house, in the last place where I lived. I knew abstract photography was something that I wanted to get into. I just didn't know how, and I didn't know what it was going to look like or what tools I had available to me. So my first initial jump into it was simply taking a photo of something that sort of misrepresented it. And you can see by the name, it's a misrepresentation of what the actual object is. And then also when I was in Lisbon, I had the opportunity to work a little bit with risograph, which is a type of photocopier technique where you send paper through once and it prints one color, you take it and you put it in again and it prints the other color on top. And you do it multiple times, and none of them come out exactly the same, because it's always based on, you know, the position of the paper as it goes through the machine. But I did a series of this, and it's just another technology. It's funny to say technology, because risograph is really from the 1980s, is only used for art. But it was just an opportunity to do something different. And that has been a sort of theme of my art career. I still go back to oil paintings for the most part, but I really like playing in other things in order to give myself an opportunity to do different stuff. So I finally got into abstract photography a little bit later. I had a few accidental photos that I took, and this is kind of how it works sometimes, is you're jumping into something and you don't really know what it is that you're doing. And then you realize, oh, hey, that worked. I wonder if I can replicate it in a different way. So one of the first images that I actually took some really tiny paint swabs, no bigger than my fingertip, so about 1/4 of an inch or about 0.75 centimeters. And I zoomed in really, really close with the camera and I took pictures of it. And that's what blur number 3 is. And that's great. It's sort of similar to what I did with the other photo that I showed you a slide ago or 2 slides ago. But I kind of wanted to do something a little bit more than just take pictures of things in odd ways that represented it in strange ways. So I threw that image into Photoshop and I just started playing with all the tools. a lot of trial and error. As a self-taught artist, which means I don't have a formal art education, I never went to school. There's a lot of trial and error, a lot of failure. That's how you learn. You throw stuff down and you really try to figure out what happened, why, and when. And then once you learn that skill, you're able to take the next step and try to create something deliberately, intentionally. And that's a lot harder than it seems. I think it was Degas who said that making good art is easy. Knowing how to make good art is very difficult. So this manipulation number 5, self-portrait on the right, is actually the exact same image as blur number 3. It's just completely redone in Photoshop to create something entirely different. And that's a little bit of a theme in my work as well. This is the same thing. Blur number 4, again, this is just one of those paint swabs. Manipulation number 4, it's the same image, super zoomed in and then changed again inside Photoshop. I'm doing this on purpose. I'm making these changes on purpose, and I'm saying this, I want you to know that the image is the same image, that it's just been redone, because I'm working with a theme of sort of misrepresentation of information. Information is always biased. It doesn't matter who says it. It doesn't matter where it's said or how it's said. Information is always biased. And a part of our identity is that we decide what information we want to believe. We either believe, this information, we believe that information, or something that's somewhere in between. And what I'm doing here is I'm intentionally saying, like, this is the original photo, and this is the same photo, just completely manipulated. And that happens all the time. It happens in the media, it happens in the business world. Every piece of information is spun somehow in order to reflect the person who is actually communicating it. And it's meant to target the person who is receiving that information as well. So there is no unbiased information at all. Even science is completely biased and spun. I decided to take things also in a little bit of a different direction as well, just to try to see if I could figure out how to sort of expand this abstract photography idea. This photo on the left, Cold Reflection, is it's a photo of some frozen pine needles with color added. And that's one direction that I went. In the other direction, this is a work in progress. Actually, it's finished now, but it was then a work in progress of some murals that I was commissioned to do for the town of Brunswick in Maine. As I was developing this mural, I was seeing an opportunity for another piece, another body of work to come out of it, not just the mural itself, but the sort of the photos that you could take from it. So this is the mural as it's being built up. And I thought, hey, that's actually wonderful imagery right there for abstract art and photography. And so I took a bunch of pictures of the mural as it was in development, and I got some really good results. This, I think, is one of the better ones. And of course, I've named it as something completely different than what the mural itself ended up being or looking like. Sometimes I think it's important to note here that, so a lot of people think of photography, you go out and you try to take the best picture you can possibly take. Maybe the light's right, the sun's right, the angle, the shadows, where you're standing, you don't want people in the photo or whatever. And that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm actually trying to take photos that I am thinking about being able to manipulate later. Okay, so sometimes those turn out to be pretty good photos in their own right, but that's not my goal. My goal is not to take a good photo that I can show to people and say, oh, I went to this place and took this great photo. I don't necessarily care about that. The one on the left here, Earth's Descent, is a perfect example. It's simply a photo out an airplane window, but I saw the way that the clouds were working with the sky, and I said, I can do something with that. It's the same thing with Essen Cole. I saw something in that moment when I was taking the picture, and I actually think the original picture is pretty good too, but when I was taking it, I was like, I could really work with that sky by adding in some color somewhere. Between the two, I personally think Essen Cole turned out to be a better image, It doesn't always work exactly the way that you want, but that is just something that it's something to kind of think about, is that when I'm taking photos, I'm not doing it with the idea of taking a good photo. I'm doing it with the idea of how I can manipulate it later. And you're going to see an example of that here in a minute. And just a couple of more photos here. Both of these images were worked up digitally completely. The one on the left, Hope and Agony, is layered. There's about 4 different photos that are layered into this one, and then it's split up, it's broken up, and there's color added. And so I'm trying to create something emotional in this image as well. I think the woman's expression, I have to admit, the photo of the woman is not mine. It's from somebody else who's in the audience here, but I was able to manipulate it into this. I think her expression really is sort of in the middle. You're not really sure what she's thinking. Is it good? Is it bad? The split of the yellow shows, and the fence shows that there's some barrier there. But of course, that sunlight, that glimmer that's in her eye gives you an opportunity to see some, hope in the future there. Watching daybreak, again, I'm saying this intentionally. Again, it's about misinformation. It looks like 2 people, in an abstract form watching sunrise. But in reality, this is actually a rock face in Utah, split up, completely redeveloped into looking the way that it looks right now. And again, it's all about that, information. The original information says this. I want to say something different, and you're getting what I'm telling you. And that's just more about the information bias that we have to deal with. These 2 projects came together a few months ago. I was tasked with cleaning out a plastic bin of photos in the closet. Basically, the photos were doing nothing, sitting in the closet. So I was told to go through them and get rid of whatever I didn't need anymore. And so the photos that I really didn't want anymore, I thought, you know what, I'll try to make some art out of this. And it's kind of interesting because I went to graduate school in Scotland, the University of Edinburgh, and I was studying European politics. Art was completely out of the question. It wasn't even something that crossed my mind. I had never taken an art class, didn't even think I could be an artist because I couldn't doodle like I used to see kids doodling in their notebook. I mean, this is so how far out of reality, how out of touch I was with, skills that you build to become an artist. But yet I was going around Scotland taking all these photos, which you might think is probably a perfectly normal thing for a person to do, when they're studying out of country, or it's almost like you're behaving like a tourist. But as I was taking these photos, I had this little voice in my head that kept saying, take the photo like this, because you're going to want to paint it someday, which was a completely ridiculous thought, because I didn't think that I could paint. I didn't think that I would ever paint. There was no reason for me to want to. And in fact, I didn't even start my first painting till 7 or 8 years after this happened. But yet there that voice was, and I took a lot of my photos with that intent. And so the idea was that I was going to reuse these photos in art. I was going to honor that voice and say, yeah, you know what, you were right. It's 20 years later, but you were right. I am an artist. I am going to work with these in an artistic way. So I just started throwing them down onto paper. And usually I'm pretty deliberate in my approach. I have an idea of what it is that I want to achieve, but having never done this before, I had no idea what I was doing. And so I just started gluing things in a way that made sense. On top of that, I was also marking up these photos with acrylic paint and oil pastel. So I would take a look at the sky that it was blue, and I said, well, it's not blue enough. So let's mark it up and let's make it bluer. And, the contrast, this isn't good enough here. So let's put another color on the other side and, and really mark it up so that it almost looks like a painting, except it was, it's an actual photo. And then I started taking pages out of books, old books from my grandmother's house, books that really had no value. They were falling apart. I started tearing up the pages, and I was finding key parts of these books with expressions and stuff that I thought was really appropriate. And I was putting them down in there, and there was some x-ray paper. And eventually I took a step back and I said, this is actually going somewhere. I'm actually telling a story here. And I didn't realize it at first, but it actually worked out really, really well. And it came together. I'm really happy with the result of this particular painting. It's 22 by 28, so it's actually pretty good size. It's framed now. It's already been in a couple of exhibits. And I personally think it's much better up close, if you ever get a chance to see it in person, than it is with the photo. But the collage also presented an opportunity for another source for abstract photos. This photo on the left, called Statement Number 2, actually was in a show earlier this May in Maine, at a juried show at a place called the Harlow Gallery, just outside of Augusta. And you can actually see this image in the collage. It's in the upper right quadrant near the center. It's the tower of the Abbey that's right there. And it's the black windows with the yellow around it. It's the close-up of that. So this is another example of taking something that was used completely differently, marking it up with different materials, taking another photo of that, and then using that as a completely different piece of art. So that one's in there. And so is this one here. This one's called Manipulation Number 6, the Lecht. The Lecht is a snow or ski slope in the north of Scotland. You can see this image in the lower left quadrant. There's a truck that's in the middle of the lower left, and this image is below that. You won't see some of the markings from Manipulation Number 6 in the collage, because the image on the right actually has 2 or 3 other photos in it. And those other photos are, the meeting has unlimited minutes. Okay, great. For a moment there, it looked like we were going to get shut off. The photo on the right has been marked up not only with acrylic paint and oil pastel, but also by layering other images into it. So it doesn't look exactly the same as it does in the lower left of the of the collage. But again, that's exactly where it came from. I saw the opportunity to take that photo and I took it off angle. It looks, for me, it looks better than if it was straight. That's sort of the purpose, is to get you to sort of feel something different about that. This one here is in the lower right of the collage. You can see like a pasted eye that's sort of right next to it. This one's called The Jails. It's been marked up with oil pastel, as well as digitally after the fact. So these two projects have really kind of come together nicely together, and it hasn't stopped. Now, I went back to how I'm doing this. The fact that I'm changing this information it's intentional. I really want to focus on that. All information is biased. This image right here is a good example of that. It's called Manipulation Number 10, Geography of a House at Night. And to me, I think that this looks like a nighttime satellite photo, something that you might see on Google. There's streets, you can see trees that are in there. There's some houses, maybe plots of land, there's farmland. But in reality, it's this image right here. It's the same image, just played over again. With this one on the right, Manipulation Number 11, again, marked up with oil pastel. And it's in the collage that I'm working on right now, which is right over my shoulder right here. And that's the original photo. So when I said earlier that I've kind of gone around taking photos, you might be thinking, oh my God, you're in Ireland. Why are you not taking pictures of like ruined castles and like cathedrals and cobblestone streets and stuff like that? Well, I've got a few of those as well, but this is the sort of thing that I'm looking for. I'm looking for that opportunity to take this photo and say, I can really work this up and make this look, differently, and make it look, like another piece of art on its own. And then here, so on the left, this is the work in progress. That's what's over my shoulder right now. You can see Manipulation Number 11 in the bottom left. There's some black and white paper that's sort of covering it up a little bit there. And then on the right, we have digital collage number 1. This is actually a collage that I put together. Again, there's 2 or 3 photos that are layered into this. I've copied and pasted some stuff from other photos and put it in. It's another piece of information that's been changed from the original. You can see this in the upper left. There's like a teal section in the upper left of the work in progress on the left-hand painting, a left-hand collage. It looks like some rope. That is actually the rope that you see in the bottom right corner of the digital collage there. So the 2 working side by side. No longer am I just taking photos, thinking that I'm going to work only in one way with them. I'm taking the photo now with the idea that I'm going to mark it up. I'm going to use it in the collage, and then I'm probably going to use it as abstract photography as well. So 2 lines of work coming together at once. These are the 3 collages. I have 2 of them that are done right now. A third one, is the work in progress. What was, answers what will be, and Utopian Descent are primarily based off of my time in Scotland, but not always. There's some photos from my childhood that are in there, and they're biographical in nature. Because it is sort of me exploring my immediate surroundings and my emotions, in the moment. Information plays such an important part in our identity. Our identity comes from what information we choose to believe, what information we choose to follow. There might be 2 news reports that comes out, and one news station reports it one way, another one reports it another way, and we're probably going to choose one of those reports to follow. And that's a really important part of our identity. So this is also an identity building exercise, and, manipulation. I mean, that's it. I mean, information is spun to the people who they know are going to listen to it. And, it's up to you to participate in that information. That's why it's presented in the way that it is. So those are kind of the basis of the project here. And I think that might be the last slide. It is, there we go. So here we go. Another image that goes back to the paint swab. It's actually layered as well. But if you would like to see more of my work, you can always go to my website. You can follow me on Instagram, on Twitter. I don't do much on Twitter, but Instagram I do a lot more. And if you really want to see my work and follow me, get sort of understand my artistic process, to see works in progress, to get advanced notice of works that are completed, originals that are finished, I put those all on Patreon. And you can do it as little as $1 a month. If you decide to do more than that, you can always save up to buy a painting, which a lot of my subscribers do. That's sort of how it works. But that is about it right now. I see we have a couple.
Yeah, I was just saying, that's amazing, Greg. Thank you for sharing your work. It was really insightful to see it all together, and from the start to where it is now in Watershed. I just have one question, well, 2 actually. What draws you to certain materials that you use?
Sometimes it just feels right. I'll be thinking about a particular project, and I'll be like, these are the materials that I can see it working with. When I first started, I had a bunch of glass panels that somebody had given me, and I said, glass would be great with oil pastel. So I did a whole bunch of oil pastels on glass, and it actually worked out pretty well. It was a fun experience. With the photos, I thought about oil, but oil just does not work well on the photos. It takes forever to dry. Oil pastel also never dries, but at least you can use a fixative on it over time. And acrylic paint seemed to work well as well. There are some images where acrylic works better than oil pastel, for example. And when I printed out the photos that I took from here, I did 2. There were like 60 photos that I took, and I printed out 120, 2 of each, because I wanted to be able to play with the colors that I had. and as of course you go along, you realize that there are different colors that work better with the type of material that you're working with. But basically, it's just a gut.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And the other question I have for you is there any artists in particular that you look to for inspiration that you kind of refer to when you're making work, or you just purely?
No, there's, I belong to a couple of artist organizations, and I'm always looking at I'm kind of the junior member in both organizations. So I'm always looking at what these guys are doing. But in terms of like famous people, Richard Diebenkorn has always been a major influence on me. I cannot paint like him at all. But I want to try to create something conceptually that's similar to his Ocean Park series, which are some wonderful abstract landscapes. Barnett Newman, I kind of stumbled on as somebody who I apparently was quite similar to with a particular line of work that I was doing. I don't know if he necessarily inspired me because I stumbled on him later, but I realized that I could connect to the work that he was doing. Edward Hopper is somebody who I've always wanted to emulate. Again, I cannot paint like Edward Hopper does, and that type of realism doesn't suit my skill set. But conceptually, I try to use the colors that he tries to use as well. And then Ernest Hemingway, as a writer, the way that he removed words and really made things very direct and declarative, I try to do that in my work a lot.
That's really interesting. I love how the writer inspires work. It really adds dimension to it, and then even the way you like name your paintings can have an effect but from writing. But yeah, that's really well answered questions. Thank you so much. And is there anybody else that would like to ask a question for Greg?
I think we have a question. Go ahead, Nevia, you're muted. Oh, it's on. Okay. When you talk about emotional unknowns, are you referring to emotions you don't have a name for, or emotions out of plan or misplaced? It's whatever. It's basically emotional unknowns. It's not something that you don't have a name for, because I'm sure some psychologist or psychiatrist out there does have a name for that particular emotion. But it's more like when you're faced with something, you just don't know what's going to happen, where or why. And it's that emotional unknown that I'm talking about. It's the future of what's unpredictable. It's nothing that's sort of planned or misplaced. I'm a climber. I'm a rock climber, and one of the great things about rock climbing is that the fear that you have when you're making your moves up the mountain, it's because you don't know what the next hold is going to be like. And it's that uncertainty that I think really works really, really well to explain this. It's that level of, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm really afraid, or it's really chaotic, or I'm really happy, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then you sort of jump in and you find out where it takes you.
Interesting.
You could call life then, instead of emotions and no. Life is like that.
Yeah, life is like that. Well, especially when you've lived in Brazil and you're married to a Brazilian.
See?
But it's not always like that. Sometimes we know what the emotion is going to be. It's sometimes you walk into something and you're pretty sure you're going to be happy, or you're pretty sure you're going to be afraid, or whatever. I'm talking about those emotions where, like, when I got on the plane to go to Chile and I didn't speak Spanish, it wasn't the first time that I'd gone on a plane by myself and gone to another country to live. And I was pretty confident that I was going to survive, that I wasn't going to die down there. But I really didn't know how I was going to go. I didn't have a place to live. I didn't know where I was going to get money. I don't know how I was going to eat. I mean, I knew I was going to go to the grocery store. I know what chicken looks like. I don't need to know the Spanish word for chicken to buy chicken in the grocery store. But I mean, it's those sorts of feelings that you don't know what's going to happen next.
Okay.
Do you have anybody
Anybody else? or will we wrap up? Thank you for everyone that was here. It was really great. And this is going to be recorded. This has been recorded and will be put on the YouTube channel if you ever want to refer to it or show anybody or be like, this is what Greg's work is. You can go and see it there. And yeah, thank you so much for giving up your time to come see Greg's and hear about Greg's work. And if there's anything more in the future, I'd love you to follow the Watershed Studios Instagram so you can be updated on these things. And yeah, thank you so much. That's enough for me. Greg, do you have any closing words? Or
Thank you very much for attending,
Thank you.
giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Love you.
Thank you. Love you
Bye.
too.
Thank you for the insight.
I had to
Well,
throw.
and well, thank you very much, folks, and thank you for participating. We'll do it again next year.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.